Folks, this is a topic, dinosaurs in the Bible, that really turns people's minds upside down. Tracy's husband recently told me that I give him a headache with some of the things that we're talking about. The reason being, what we're talking about is a completely different worldview than what school and our society will paint for you. Some of the topics we're going to look at tonight are dinosaurs in the Bible, were dinosaurs on the ark, where does dinosaurs fit in a creationist worldview, do they prove evolution, is there proof that man and dinosaurs coexisted, and I will also touch on the real rage today about dinosaurs, about whether they had feathers or not. And why is the word dinosaur not in the Bible? Evolutionists believe that most dinosaurs died 65 million years ago when a giant meteor exploded on hitting the Yucatan Peninsula. You can see the Yucatan, which is just below the United States at the bottom part of the Gulf of Mexico. The impact crater, they think, was 100 miles wide and set the North American continent ablaze. Many species of not only dinosaurs but all animals were killed immediately by the blast, and others died for lack of food, because what would have occurred with this kind of huge impact is you would have had a huge amount of debris thrown into the upper atmosphere. That amount of debris thrown into the upper atmosphere would have encircled the Earth for as much as a year or more, causing what we call a nuclear winter effect. You simply couldn't get sunlight to the surface. Well, if the plants die, guess what happens to the animals? They would have died off. What does the Bible say about all this? Because we just looked at the evolutionary viewpoint. What does the Bible say? This is from day 6. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth on the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. And God saw that everything he had made, and behold, it was very good, and the evening and the morning were the 6th day. I left out quoting day 5 because that's when the flying animals were made, which would not only include birds, it would also include pteranodons, pterosaurs, and things, flying dinosaurs. But note that we're not only talking about when the Bible says the beasts of the earth, which would include cattle, oxen, as well as dinosaurs, but also it says that everything ate what? Plants. Everything was a vegetarian. That's going to be an interesting part of this discussion as we move forward. Now here's the real reason dinosaurs became extinct. Just too much smoking. It's never good for you. There are a lot of legends out there about men in the Middle Ages killing not dinosaurs, what they call them? Dragons. This is a painting done of St. George, who around 300 AD supposedly killed a dragon that was terrorizing a neighborhood. If you had, well, let's just go with our imagination for a moment. If you were a medieval village and you had, take your pick, a tyrannosaur, an allosaurus, a velociraptor, anything in the neighborhood, were they a menace? Yes. And so what would be one of the favorite outdoor sports of people? To get rid of them. You got a menace. Today, if we've got a wild bear that is hunting people, it's already killed one person or two, what do? We go get rid of it. And so the question comes, are all these dragon myths simply that, myths, or are they the seed of telling us what actually occurred when the dinosaurs were on the ark, existed after the flood, and man killed them off, as well as the environment afterwards? We're going to discuss that. One of the best places that you can see dragon lore is in Chinese culture. The Chinese have a huge amount of paintings, artifacts, and writings about dragons. The Bible and history says the dinos were on the ark and survived for centuries. And now that's by inference, that everything went on the ark. 2 of what? Unclean, and 7 of the clean. Were the dinosaurs the seed for the dragon and sea serpent legends? In the Chinese culture, dragons were supposed to have laid eggs just as the dinosaurs did. How did they know they laid eggs if they'd never seen a dinosaur? We find plenty of eggs today, plenty of fossilized eggs, showing that the dinosaurs did lay eggs, just as the Chinese mythos said. The Komodo dragon is the largest living species of lizard, growing to an average length of 2 or 3 meters. This is due to a biological phenomenon called island gigantism. There's no predator that feeds on the Komodo dragon. Therefore, one being a reptile, it simply grows as long as it lives. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And since it has no predators to feed on it, on the islands that it inhabits, it simply grows to these ridiculous distances or lengths of 8 to 9 feet. Were all human dragon myths seeded by these animals, or were there other dragons around just a few hundred years ago? That's a question. Medium well, please. Is that just a joke, this fire-breathing dragon stuff? Well, take a look at Parasaurolophus. Parasaurolophus was a dinosaur that had this huge cranium crest with hollows throughout. If you saw Jurassic Park or other movies, what is the main thesis of evolutionists today about what this cranium crest is all about? They think it's a huge horn. And it could be. If these are hollows that went through his larynx and down to the lungs, and he could pipe through air at an accelerated rate and with a certain modulation, this might have been a huge horn. This guy might have made an amazing set of noises. But we don't know that these openings were connected to the larynx. What if this guy is like the bombardier beetle? What if he has one gland here which is producing hydroquinone and one here that's producing hydrogen peroxide, and what's mixed here is an explosive mixture? Could we get this? The problem is we don't know. All we're dealing with is bone. We don't even have the organs anymore. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's a possibility. Some of the things we do know: Thunderbird or Pteranodon. And is the Indian Thunderbird just a myth? The design at the bottom of the rug. What is this a design of at the bottom of this rug? It's a killer whale. Do they exist? Yes. They do. On the same rug, they put a what? Thunderbird, which looks a whole lot like a Pteranodon. Why would they draw a mythical figure on the same place that they draw one that they see every day? Here's our recreations of what we believe pteranodons or pterosaurs look like. Do they bear a striking resemblance to the Indian Thunderbird? Not only in terms of the crest, but also in terms of this ability to almost walk what? Upright. You may have heard of them finding blood cells and other types of soft tissues inside dinosaurs. Inside the leg bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex up in Montana several years ago, famous archaeologist Jack Horner, they accidentally uncovered these red blood cells and soft tissues. He gave the material to Dr. Mary Schweitzer of North Carolina State University. Incidentally, neither Horner nor Schweitzer is a creationist. They are hard evolutionists. And yet, when Schweitzer took a look at the soft parts that were inside these bones, she identified them distinctly as soft tissues and red blood cells, which in no way could have ever survived 65 million years of fossilization and time. They would have been broken down or fossilized at this point. Here's a close-up look at some of the soft tissues under a microscope. Now, that's not the only time that we found soft tissues. I'm just going to give two examples here. We have multiple ones. There are soft tissue osteocytes, that's bone cells, found in a triceratops, inside the front bone of that triceratops. These were found, and they're pictured here under a microscope, by Mark Armitage, who used to be with Cal State University Northridge. He is no longer with Cal State University Northridge. You know why? They fired him? Yeah, they fired him because he published this stuff. Dinosaurs are supposed to be 65 million years old. The last ones are supposed to have died off 65 million years ago. And yet we have tested 43 dinosaur bones, and they have tested less than 40,000 years old according to C14 dating. Again, C14 dating has certain problems to it, certain inaccuracies. But the real question is, if C14 dating is true at all, after 200,000 years, there should be no C14 left in the sample whatsoever. The thought that these have all tested less than 40,000 years old That's real bad for the evolutionary idea because they're all supposed to be what? Millions, 65 million years old or more. This, on the surface though, looks like it could be a problem for the creationists, because from the creationist point of view, how old should these things test to be? 6 to 10,000 years old. However, their assumption, these were tested by secular labs, their assumption was there's been the same amount of C14, that's radioactive carbon, in the atmosphere for the last 4.5 billion years, basically. If the Bible is true, if the world was created pristine 6 to 10,000 years ago, originally how much C14 radioactive carbon was in the atmosphere? Essentially none. Which means the amount of C14 that was originally in these animals was far less. When you make the adjustment for that assumption in these calculations, their ages come down under 6,000 years. Scientists have discovered soft tissue in a T-Rex bone, and they say is 70 million years old. 70 million years? No way. I can't get a turkey sandwich to survive for 3 weeks, even in the refrigerator. I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's huge for what we're talking about today. Imagination is not observation. When an archaeologist finds a bone, and he starts saying, okay, I wonder what this thing looked like. He takes it to an artist. They make a drawing or a picture of what they think it looked like. He'll take it to somebody else. They'll make a completely different idea of what it looked like. You can recognize this dinosaur. Which one is it? It's called Stegosaurus. As I emphasized in the last month, we almost never find 100% find. Where you see red-orange, that's bone. Where you see white, that's what? That's plaster that's filled in. This thing is less than a 40% find that they have pieced together. Here are the different ideas of what Stegosaurus has looked like over the last 120 years. Has there been complete agreement even about this one dinosaur that we have found multiple finds, more than a dozen finds of Stegosaurus? No. Yeah, I don't know if that's pretty close. But anyway, and this one, boy, he is droopy. This looks like Eeyore right down here. But the grand problem is, do we even know that the plates were attached? We do not. We do not have the original animal to take a look at. Whenever we get these partial bone sets, it's like having an erector set with 60% of the pieces missing. And so it's always a debate as to how he goes together. Now let's talk about dino diets for a moment. According to the Bible, all dinosaurs, all people, all animals in the beginning were supposed to be what? Plant eaters, herbivores, before sin, according to the Bible. After sin, many animals, not all, were turned into carnivores or omnivores. What's an omnivore? They eat both. We fall into that category. They eat plants and they also eat meat. Which dinosaur is this? Tyrannosaurus rex. I always put this in because the kids at middle school love this. Notice something about T-Rex that always disturbed me. Those are the wimpiest arms on the planet. Okay? Let me show you a different picture of T-Rex. Most people don't think of T-Rex this way, but let me tell you why I described him this way. Number one, he still has the wimpiest arms on the planet. He had great forelimbs, so he could probably run, but the grand question is about why would this looks like he's almost no man lost his teeth. What we found out is this guy had huge teeth, and I'm going to show them to you in a moment, which have been defined as carnivorous teeth, and I'm going to debate that one in a minute. But they had very shallow roots. What does very shallow roots in his teeth mean? They would come out easily. If you're an animal that's biting and trying to rip meat, is it real useful if your teeth fall out regularly? Not really. We also found out from the concave set of his eyes, the curvature of the entrance for his eyes, that it is possible, we don't know this was shown in Jurassic Park, it is possible that he could only see things when they were moving, could only detect sight through movement. Is that real good for a predator that if I just stand still, you can't see me? That's actually terrible. There's some questions about animals like this. There's his teeth, which ought to frighten anybody. But again, they fall out rather easily. Let's examine this whole thing, because this whole thing of teeth. Because when you go to a museum, they will automatically tell you this animal was a carnivore, this one was a herbivore. I'm going to challenge that. Look at the panda here. Pandas have what kind of teeth? Carnivorous. What they would call canine or carnivorous teeth, so they should be meat eaters. They're not meat eaters. Guess what these guys eat? Bamboo. And incidentally, are those teeth well suited for breaking down and tearing bamboo? Yes. Well suited. Does anybody know who that guy is? Cutie. Sloth? Nope, that's not a sloth. That's a honey bear. He has carnivorous teeth in there, but he also has something interesting out here. What are those claws? You put carnivorous teeth together with a guy who has those kind of claws, and what are we going to make him out if all we do is find the bones? We're going to say this guy's a predator. This guy is a meat eater. This guy's a hunter. He does none of the above. What does he use the claws for, and what does he use his teeth for? Tear into honeycombs. Is it possible, from what I've shown you, that T-Rex was the biggest watermelon eater on the planet? I don't know. To really tell you the truth about this, that was not true forever. After the fall, he was a meat eater. We know that for sure, not because of his teeth, but because there have been about 30 T-Rex finds, and 2 of them had stomach contents. In one of those stomachs, we found 2 birds, and in another stomach, we found a portion of another dinosaur that had been ripped into his stomach. So at some point, he is a what? Carnivore. But is that just after the flood, and what was he before the flood? According to the Bible, in Genesis 1:30, and every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every herb for meat. So according to the Bible, before the flood, everything was supposed to be a vegetarian. After the flood, Genesis 9, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fish of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered, and every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as a green herb I have given you all things. We already pointed out a couple of sessions ago that there was some real genetic engineering that went on at the time of the flood to convert from people who could live to 900 years to a point they have a cap of 120 years on them. Our lifespans went down. That's not the only genetic engineering. There was genetic engineering with attack and defense structures in a lot of animals, and that's a whole different lecture that I haven't got the time to go into tonight. But also it looks like that all those animals that used to eat herbs, at least half of them were turned into what? Carnivores, just as man was. What about all these missing links? I have presented that there are no missing links. That whenever you examine the halves and halves, the half reptile, half mammal, and all this kind of stuff, they fall apart. Now, to be fair, though, if you talk to the evolutionists, they will say, no, that creationist is lying to you. We have thousands of halves and halves. We have thousands of missing links. Let's closely examine just one of their proposed trails so that you can evaluate it for yourself. Let's talk about the ancestry of T-Rex. Paleontologists have unearthed 3 fossilized dinosaurs believed to be the oldest ancestors of the Tyrannosaur family. The newest species had the cranial crest and may have been covered in protofeathers. Really, the protofeathers are hairs that they think turned into feathers millions of years later. But were only 1/3 the size of its cousin T-Rex. Still, the discovery sets back the clock on the Tyrannosaur family by 30 million years. Here is what this thing that they believe lived 160 million years ago, here's what they think he looked like. That guy look a whole lot like T-Rex? Not really. But let's go along with their story. They think that 160 million years ago you had this guy. Incidentally, and I'm going to go back there for a moment, this is what they think his head looked like. This is the bone that they worked from. How much of that is good science and how much of that is artwork? A lot of artwork. The adult specimen, which was 12 years old when it died, how did they know it was 12 years old when it died? They're going by rings inside the cross-section of its bones. We do that today when we do an analysis of a dead animal or a dead human. Is just like tree rings, we can sometimes tell age by looking at the cross-section of bones. The problem is we gauge that by, do we have humans at different ages in which we can inspect their bones when they died? We do the same thing with animals. How many dinosaurs were we able to test? Okay, we grew this one till he was 6 and he died, so I tested his bones. We were able to test none of these. So they are making ridiculous assumptions when they start telling you that this thing was 12 years old or another one was a 6-year-old juvenile. Both lived, again, they think, around 160 million years ago, and this is what they think he looked like. I'm going to show you where they think all these proto-feathers or fur came from in a moment, but this is what they think the earliest ancestor of T-Rex looked like. The next guy along the line, at about 150 million years ago, 10 million years later, was a guy called Girafinator that was found in the Jura Mountains in Germany. In the middle line of the dinos believed to be developing feathers is a 2.5-foot tall one with scales, no follicles, no feathers. So follow this for a minute. Number one, the original guy, and incidentally I didn't use his name, the original guy here is called Guanlong Wokai. Guess where he was found? China. Now you have Girafinator. This guy was 9 to 10 feet tall. This guy is how big?
2.5.
2.5 maybe. The earliest one was 10 feet tall. Now this one has gotten much smaller. He's lost his proto-feathers. He is now fully reptilian with scales. Then you get the third ancestor coming along at about 130 million years called DeLong Paradoxus. Incidentally, with that name, where was he found? China. Discovered in China by the same researchers as Guanlong Wokai. They found this skull and they drew somebody who has what? Basically looks dinosaur-like. No proto-feathers or anything else, but they said no, he has to have proto-feathers, so they drew him with proto-feathers. Now, what's all this proto-feathers or hairs coming from? When you look at the rocks around these types of fossils, you will very often find striations in the rocks. These striations could be a lot of things. It could just be junk and peat and all sorts of debris that was buried in with the fossil. It could also be this. If we have an alligator or a crocodile that is quick buried today and fossilized, its skin unravels, its collagen actually comes apart, and we get this same type of striations in the rock. So my question is, when they see these kind of striations in the rock, is that indicative of hairs or proto-feathers on these things, or is it just the skin coming apart? We don't know. But because the evolutionists want to so push reptiles and dinosaurs evolved into what? Birds, they are reading into this that these are proto-feathers that are going to turn into feathers someday. Here's a close-up look of the head of this last DeLong Paradoxus. Here's two artists' ideas of what this guy looked like. Do they look the same? No. This guy I'm running from, this guy I'd put a leash on and take him out for a walk. But in both cases, notice that unlike the first rendition of this guy, where he looked very dinosaur-like, what are they doing today? They're always putting what?
Feathers.
Feathers or fur on him, because the whole idea today is that dinosaurs turned into birds.
Looks like an ostrich.
Looks like an ostrich. So check this out. According to their idea of T-Rex ancestry, he first had a crest, feathers, and is huge. Then he's smaller with no feathers. Then he's larger with feathers, all before dinosaurs were to have evolved into birds. And what have you seen on most T-Rexes? Do they have feathers? No. They were reptilian with scales. So the order makes no sense. Do you see a nice line that will convince you that these are the ancestors of T-Rex? I don't think so to a reasonable person. When the Whitty Museum was invaded by a dinosaur display about 3 years ago, there were 10 different dinosaurs that they covered in proto-feathers or hairs. Guess what this thing is supposed to be? A hairy T-Rex. A hairy T-Rex. And of that hairy T-Rex, we have found 30 T-Rex finds. Only the last one, a juvenile, found, guess where? China. And I'm going to keep talking about China because I am extremely suspicious of the finds coming out of China in the last 12 years. But only the last one had the suggestion of protofeathers. How has T-Rex been drawn for the last 100 years? As a reptile. This is Velociraptor like you never saw him in Jurassic Park. Covered in protofeathers. And again, do we have good substantiation for that? No, we don't. But it fits what they're talking about today. Fortunately, recently there have been a lot of dino frauds. Archaeoraptor in 1999 was the worst one, and this was laid out as a big piece of National Geographic. I cannot believe the Chinese allowed this thing to tour in the U.S. It is obvious that the reason they did was that they did not understand the fraud that their archaeologists had pulled off. At the University of Texas in Austin, they did CT scans on this pieced together fossil, and they found out that it was actually 5 fossils glued together. 5 different animals glued together. The thing was a complete fraud. They told National Geographic about that. National Geographic said, we don't care, and they ran the story as true. And again, where are the bulk of these feather finds coming from today? They're all coming from China because that's what's selling. At the front of the Whitty Museum, they had what they call Gigantoraptor. I called it Big Bird on steroids. The interesting thing about this guy is, when you look at this guy, boy, he looks like he's half dino, half bird, with a bill and with hair and all this kind of stuff. Here is the original bones put together off this guy. He has no beak. He has no feathers that were shown. When you ask them, why did you draw a beak and feathers on this guy, they said, well, that's just naturally how evolution would have worked. Is that science or supposition? That's pure supposition. Where does it talk about dinosaurs in the Bible? Dinosauria, which was an original term, is equated to our dinosaurs. Sir Richard Owen first called them terrible lizards and then dinosaurs, and that was back in 1841. Now, of course, the King James Bible was translated in 1611, so we're talking about a period of more than 200 years that the Bible's latest translations had predated the use of that term dinosaur. What terms are used in the Bible that might describe dinosaurs? Leviathan, dragon, serpent, a whole lot of things. It says in the Bible, praise the Lord from the earth, sea monsters and all the deeps. Sea monsters. Is that just whales? In point of fact, if you look in several places in the scriptures, you find sea monsters described, you find dragons described. In the day that the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. Today, our biggest animal is the blue whale, but of course there were dinosaurs that were far bigger than even the blue whale of today. In Job it says, behold Behemoth which I made with thee. He moveth his tail like a cedar. He is the chief of the ways of God. Remember that one. He moveth his tail like a cedar. When they're talking about cedars of Lebanon that they were used to, we're talking about the type of redwoods that we have out in California at this point. Huge trees. This guy had bones like tubes of bronze, it goes on in Job. Feeds on grass. Raging rivers don't disturb him. Would a huge raging river disturb an elephant or a hippopotamus? It would, but not if he was a brachiosaurus or a potosaurus. There is talk that, and you will even see this in Schofield Reference Bible and others, that when they start talking about this guy, that Behemoth, what you're really talking about is a hippopotamus or an elephant. Well, my first problem with that is, take a look at the tail on this guy. Is that a tail you would describe as like a cedar tree? No, that's one of the wimpiest tails you'll ever see. The same is true for the elephant. They have some of the wimpiest tails there ever were. Well, was it ever true that they had tails like this? No, that's not in recorded history. That's a cartoon joke. But when you start comparing their tales to those of dinosaurs and the descriptions of them being able to run through raging rivers, being able to have bones like steel, the description for a large dinosaur far better fits that than the elephant or rhinoceros or anything else. In the book of Job, God told Job to behold Behemoth. It was probably also a good idea to beware Behemoth, because you could have got stepped on rather easily. Leviathan out of Job 41, cannot fish hook him. Sight of him is overpowering. No chance to subdue him. Cannot harpoon his hole. Doors of his mouth. Why would they describe it as doors of his mouth? Fire streaks from his mouth. There's that fire-breathing stuff again. That's bad. Smoke from his nostrils. Now, the descriptions they have could go to a waterborne dinosaur we knew of called the Plesiosaur. We don't know. Here's a picture of a sea serpent or dragon called Yataru. This is from the Yalanji tribe in Australia from perhaps 1,500 years ago. Folks, what's in the middle of this dinosaur? Somebody's been swallowed or eaten or whatever. They're doing battle with this guy. Incidentally, how are they doing? They're not doing well. They're losing. Does this go right in hand with the description we just saw from Job that you're not going to be able to subdue this guy? That he's going to be too big, too mean for you? This is just one picture that looks like, guess what dinosaur? A plesiosaur. But this is not, in Australia, the only place we've ever seen that. This is a drawing from Italy during the early Roman era, which shows plesiosaurs. And here is another drawing from Europe, which again depicts a plesiosaur. This is again hundreds, thousands of years before they ever found the bones of these things and they were ever put together in a museum of any type. How did they know what they look like? Here is a sculpture of a plesiosaur-looking dinosaur from South America. Again, these things are from all over the world. In Isaiah 14:29 it says, serpent's root shall come forth an adder, and his fruit shall be fiery or venomous, flying serpent. They keep talking about these fiery flying serpents, these fiery dragons. Isaiah 36, the burden of the beast of the south into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the lion. Incidentally, are lions real? Yes. The viper, are vipers real? Yeah. And fiery flying serpents, they will carry their riches upon the shoulders of mules. Are mules real? And their treasures upon the bunches of camels. They have described 6 different animals in that piece of scripture, 5 of which we still have around today. Why did they throw in a cartoon character with it if they didn't actually deal with these things? Why the death pose? Many dinosaurs and birds are found in what's called the death pose. Their neck is craned back. Now, what they told us for decades, because we find so many dinosaur and so many animal finds that are like this, was that there is a natural inclination of the muscles when they contract to go into that position. So when something dies, it goes like that. We have now found biologically that that is 100% untrue. If there is a muscle contraction, what do animals go into once they die? They go into a fetal position like that. So, if that's not the way these things all, and I'd say there are hundreds of thousands of these fossils found with these craned necks, what could that mean? They were trying to get their last breaths as they were covered over in water and mud. If all of these hundreds of thousands of fossils show this, what could it indicate? That they were covered by the flood. Genesis 7:2, take you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, and a male and its mate, and 1 of every kind of unclean animal. Oh crap, was that today? No, they didn't just forget to RSVP. Here's what a lot of people will say. How could Noah have possibly fit dinosaurs on the ark? How is it possible for your mother to give birth to you? That's a good comeback question. Even the largest full-grown creatures were once small. Do you think that Noah was really doing this to get brachiosaur and apatosaur on there? And incidentally, I'm not taking a full-grown T-Rex with me, whether he's a herbivore or not. You've got to give God at least as much credit as you give us. If we are doing Noah's Ark today, what do we put on Noah's Ark? We put small animals. One, so that they'll fit, but also there's a practical reason for this. Why are the dinosaurs, why are all the animals put on the ark?
To reproduce.
They have to reproduce. Are grandpa and grandma going to reproduce? They're going to put young ones on there because they're the ones that are going to have to replenish the earth afterwards. And so it's going to be young ones. The average size of the animal put onto the ark was somewhere between a rat and a goat. The ark was huge. You'll get, if you decide to go up to Kentucky in 2 years, you will find a full-size ark made by Answers in Genesis. They're constructing it now. It was bigger than a football stadium. When the ark came to ground, the dinosaurs were there to replenish the earth, as were all the other creatures, if they were made with man and if they coexisted with man. And they came out after the flood. Now, they probably didn't have sunglasses, but they did come out to a very different earth, an earth that now had wide swings in temperature, whereas the pre-flood earth did not. And many of the dinosaurs were killed off by the ice age that would follow the flood, because we do believe there was an ice age that was produced by the flood occurrence, and they were killed off by man because they were pests. There are a lot of fossils today which really shows that things haven't died off the way they thought they did. It was thought 100 years ago that the coelacanth, which we found a lot of fossils for, was just an extinct dinosaur form. But in 1938, off the coast of South Africa, they found one, and now they found a second set, or a second species of coelacanth in the waters off Japan. It was originally thought that this guy had proto-legs. What do I mean by proto-legs? He had fins that were connected, they thought, to muscular structure to where he was able to start being amphibious and starting to walk, which would be a half fish, half amphibian. And they also thought he was a lungfish, that he was somebody who was developing lungs that again could be amphibian. That was all working from fossils. Once we found the real guy in the waters off of South Africa and in Japan, guess what? These are fins, they're not proto-legs, and he has gills. He is not a lungfish. This is nothing but a what? Fish. It is not a half fish, half amphibian, which used to be one of their missing links, but they had to throw it out because they found some live ones. What's really interesting in the fossil record is, if evolution is true, ought to see changes over time. That's what evolution is about. One thing develops into another. Something else develops even further. We find fossils of a dragonfly that is supposedly 200 million years old. Is it any different whatsoever than a dragonfly today? None. We find fossils of stingrays, which are 100% the same as stingrays today, even though this original fossil is supposed to be 250 million years old. Is evolution something that simply stands still and never changes? No, that goes with the biblical account that says everything was made according to its kind, and the kind stay the same. Fossils of horseshoe crabs show they have not changed in 450 million years. Again, evolution couldn't even hope to explain such a thing. Modern shrimp show no changes from the fossil of shrimp supposedly 170 million years ago. What do we see in the bottom of the fossil record? Shrimp are shrimp, crabs are crabs, and the kinds have not changed, which is what the Bible described, but evolution can never buy. Dinosaurs may not have been this domesticated to where you could go for a ride. Adam, do you know what happened to our food for tonight? Burp. I didn't even touch it, Eve. Living with dinosaurs was probably a problem even back in Adam and Eve's time. But Marco Polo reported dragons were raised to pull the emperor's coach in 1275 AD. I wonder if he was just a liar. But Marco Polo's not the only one who referenced this raising of dragons to pull emperor's coaches, because that was also described in Chinese writings and Chinese lore. Is it possible that man at one point did live with herbivorous dinosaurs? Just stayed out of their way. This is a picture, and I'll show you another print of it in a moment, of a hadrosaur footprint with, guess what is part of this footprint? A human footprint. And you say, well, I can't really see that. I don't know if that's human or not. Let me give you a different picture of just this human footprint. Here is a close-up of that footprint. This, incidentally, is from the Creation Evidences Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. If you want to know what size this is, it's woman's size 7. I know that because when Dr. B.A. several years ago pulled the thing out, which they do about once a month, they invited everyone to go try to put their foot into it, and the only woman who could was a woman's size 7. People will say, have said, one, this is a fraud. Through doing CT scans, they have proved it's not a fraud because there are pressure points when they did CT scans underneath the roll and heel of this foot. If you're just doing a fraud and imprinting a foot down into mud, you get an even impression underneath it. But if you're walking, what happens when we walk? We have pressure roll points on the balls of our feet and on the heels of our feet, which would show impacted sediment of that type of extra pressure put there. Guess what they found beneath the balls and the heels of the foot of this impression? They found deeper impression marks, which shows that this was not a fraud. But it does show a human footprint inside a what? Dinosaur footprint, giving us good evidence that the two lived at the same time. Another thing that fits well within the creationist viewpoint and is terrible for evolutionary viewpoint is that almost 3/4 of the world has huge amounts of animal graveyards, and many of them are dinosaur graveyards. Karoo, South Africa, the Canadian graveyard, dinosaur graveyard in Brigham, Wyoming, the Gobi Desert fossils. If the evolutionary idea is true, there should be accidents that occur where an animal gets covered over. There should be times when an animal dies and gets buried, and therefore we'll find fossils in different places. But what we find most often is absolutely anywhere between hundreds of thousands and millions of fossils all put together in one small area, what we call a fossil graveyard. What does that fit into? That fits into a flood geology. And it only fits into a flood geology. This is absolutely terrible news for the evolution concept, but it's great for a creationist worldview. Because as I've said before, the way you make a fossil is something gets buried very quickly, gets fossilized, and then gets uncovered by erosion later. This does not fit into the evolutionary viewpoint, but it fits within the creationist very well. So my question is, which is fact or fiction? Is the standard geologic column, which says that one thing was buried upon another down to the simplest forms of life with dinosaurs in the middle hundreds of millions of years ago, is that really the truth? Is this just a construct in men's minds that we don't have good evidence for? Or is this really the truth, that the Creator not only formed the dinosaurs from the start at the creation with us, but He also looked out for them and put them on the ark for a period of time? Interesting stuff, this idea of man and dinosaurs coexisting. Here is a cave wall, and you really can't see the dinosaur that's right there, so I've outlined it right here. And we've also got this cave wall. What is this a drawing of?
T-Rex.
Looks like T-Rex or Allosaurus, which is very close to T-Rex. This is some type of brachiosaur or apatosaur. Why would cavemen make these drawings?
Yeah, for real.
Only if they saw them. It's not like they went to the Whitty or the Smithsonian and were doing pictures from their vacation. They would have to see these things. These are burial stones by the Incas from South America. Which dinosaur is that? Triceratops. This is probably an Allosaurus. Again, why would they be drawing these if they'd never seen them? These are from 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. They could only be making these drawings because there were no museums, there were no excavations that were putting these dinosaurs together at this point. They could have only drawn them because they saw them. What's real interesting to me is What's all this swirling stuff and caricatures? You think that's just all artwork? What's interesting is, for a long time, most of us just thought this was them being artistic by throwing all this stuff in. But what we found in the last 15 years is we found a sample of preserved, frozen dinosaur skin, and guess what kind of drawings or impressions were on that skin? This same stuff. They drew what they saw. This is a temple in Cambodia. What animal's that? Monkey. What's that one? Nope. Antelope or something of that nature. Animals that they saw every day. That's what they drew on their temple. What's that one? Stegosaurus. Again, it happens all over the world, folks. Why would they draw a Stegosaurus on there? Because they had some dream while they were on hashish or cocaine? No. It's because they saw these things. Man and dinosaurs coexisted. Evolution says the dinosaurs died off 65 million years ago. Now, there are 100 different ideas about how they died off, and that man only showed up in the last 2 million years. And so we are separated by at least 63 million years of history. So there should be no interaction. And yet we see huge evidences of interaction, which fits with the biblical model, but is terrible for evolutionism. Some conclusions about dinosaurs. Conclusions about their dying off may be false. Assumptions about them from fossil remains often use wrong assumptions. God created them. They only became extinct recently. Even C14 dating backs that up. God put them on the ark, as he said he did all animals, and they lived with man because man shows a lot of examples of the fact that he saw them. This is the type of thing right here that does give people headaches, because am I pushing a complete worldview that's 180 degrees different than what the educational public is trying to push? Yes. It is. They have to have deep time, and they have to have it. They have to have evolution if they're going to write God out of the picture. And really, that's what this is about. This is a whole story of, did we happen by accident and I'm not responsible to anybody, or is there a God and am I responsible to him? That's what this whole fight's about. Let's make sure we understand what's made it worse. It's been going on forever that man has been saying, no, God, I don't want to pay attention to you. That's what Adam and Eve did and got kicked out of the garden for. And it's also been true that there have been people who've been faithful to God, like Adam and Eve, I hope, did come back to him, and like Job did, and like and Abraham and others. There's always been a struggle about whether or not we're going to believe God, believe his word, or believe what man says. But what's been happening for the last 150 years is that the theologians have been running from this whole discussion. Since the time of Darwin, they have punted and said, okay, science proves that evolution is true. I hope I've made one impression so far. Is that a true statement? Evolution is not proven. I should be able to say at this point, I can't prove that creation occurred, nor can I prove that evolution occurred, but which have I made a better case for over the past 11 weeks? Creation. There is still a faith component here. There always will be. Because we have no eyewitnesses besides the Bible of what occurred at the creation, what occurred at the flood.
The evolutionists is based on faith too.
Oh, and they will never own up to that. They will never own up to that. They say they're science and we're blind faith. The truth is really reversed on all this. We have far better scientific evidence for what we propose than they do. But the media hype says very different.